right, friends, we have arrived to the second week of April. It's astrology and transits. Please excuse my voice today. I had a severe cold. Today is day 1 of recovery, and I still sound like Elmer Fudd. But I thought I'll give it a try. If it sounds ridiculous, I will not post this video. But I do sound stuffy, and I might be having a little sniffly nose and take more breaks than usual. So let's quickly go through the transits for the second week of April, and then I'll go through them one by one. The video will also be timestamped, so if you guys want to just go to whatever day that you want to go to, you can also do that. We're gonna kick off the week right off the bat with a full moon in the sign of Libra. And this full moon is very significant because it's the first full moon that we have after the last eclipse of March 29th in the sign of Aries, where sun and moon were conjunct, and that was a new moon but involved in an eclipse. And the eclipses were showing us in this axis what's no longer sustainable in terms of how we want to be, in that Aries qualities of being an individual, becoming individuated in relation to our relational dynamics with others. This is what the eclipses were doing. So this full moon is acting like a spotlight, showing us how far we've come and how things have been reconfigured in our lives. You know, in the past 18 months, we had to do a lot of negotiating between the concept of independence and interdependence, between ourselves and others, what we want for ourselves, what we want to take and conquer, and how or to what extent we're willing to share with others. And this full moon is also important because the moon showing up into the sign of Libra as a full moon for the first time without the presence of South Node Ketu. So there's that passivity that would come with the previous full moons in the sign of Libra, or that sense of detachment. And almost one could even say with a sense of resentment, because Ketu is it's just holding everything within. It wasn't allowing us to engage, but this full moon is actually about engagement with that Libra themes. And of course, always look at where Libra is sitting in your chart, where Aries is sitting in your chart, which house. It's talking about negotiating these life dynamics through the themes of that house and the people that pertain to it. We should by now have a different kind of understanding about what is mutual responsibility, what is reciprocity, what is my relationship to you, what's your relationship to me. These are the things that these eclipses were working through. And, you know, we always associate Libra with just cooperation, reciprocity, and peacefulness because it's Venus' sign. So we always assume it's about smoothing things over, and like Libra ascendant people or Libra sun people have this bad rep for being indecisive because they're just trying to go with the flow and the mood of the group so that they don't rock the boat. But Libra is also very much about seeking justice. So in its softer form is about wanting fairness. But when fairness is not given, when that equilibrium cannot be established, the sign of Libra is seeking for justice to rebalance that equilibrium. So in a lot of ways, it can become a very rational and a discerning sign is of the air elements. There's intelligence here. And the mature form of Libra understands that balance is not just about maintaining some sort of a pretty symmetry. It's about harmony that can include a lot of complexity. The concept of justice is very complex if we sit there and think about it. If you've ever been wronged by someone, that first inclination and instinct might be to want to have justice, but it's such a complex thing because if you want to come and act it out, it could translate to a lot of consequences, or it could translate to you disturbing the balance and the equilibrium of some things. So Libra is actually a very heavy sign in that sense. Not heavy like Saturn heaviness, but it can hold a lot of complexity in it. And we have to give that to all the air signs in terms of the intelligence that's within it and the way that they can hold complexity within themselves. Like this full moon is going to make it clear for us because it's lit. There's a full moon. The moon represents the mind. So the mind has great capacity right now to understand where the old relational structures have collapsed, where they no longer work. I mean, Ketu was doing its thing there, right? It was like sniping things out and sabotaging a lot of things. So here we are. We're kind of standing on that land of Libra and we're like, oh, okay, that's what happened here. I mean, this Libra Aries axis through these eclipses, they were constantly forcing us to confront power relations. Our identity versus another person's identity, my wants versus your wants. So there was a confrontation in this dynamic between Aries and Libra. So our relational dynamics in general were changed, and this full moon is going to allow us to see what has happened and what it's all been about. And another blessing of this full moon in terms of being lit and being able to see and having a clear mind, we're going to start to understand, okay, what are the new rules of engagement? How do I implement this self-identity, and how do I implement the rules and the kind of reciprocity that's needed right now in my relational dynamics with other people? And this axis was actually kind of nice, the eclipses, because it taught us how not to compromise ourselves. But now with this full moon, we're learning, well, okay, I'm not going to compromise myself and my integrity, but how do I compromise with you in the fullness of the person that I am? And we got to remember, Sun on the other end in the sign of Aries right now is exalted. I know with this new full moon, we'll see that there are certain aspects of our lives and certain relational dynamics where there is no turning back anymore. It's a new world. It's a new way of being within ourselves and with other people. So it's like the emergence of new balance, new type of an equilibrium, and we're getting to see what that is. You know, it's kind of like two nations where they draw the line and they're like, well, this is my land, that's your land. It can start off that way, right? But at some point, we're going to have to negotiate with each other, not to put massive, insane tariffs on each other. I don't want to get political. You know what? I think in my last lifetime, I was heavily involved in politics, because in this lifetime, every time something political comes up, my blood is boiling. It's as if something is personal. So I always practice of just like, keep a calm mind, or just don't even talk about politics. Be cool. I just said tariffs, and then it just like started coming forth. But we're learning how to have these boundaries, but also how not to keep things so separated and conflictual, because these eclipses were creating these kinds of feelings. So we're learning new negotiation methods, new kinds of diplomacy. Venus, Mercury has a reputation for being diplomatic, but the ruler of Libra, Venus, has even a greater kind of a capacity for diplomacy. For example, diplomacy, some aspects of it requires softness, receptiveness, patience, not necessarily qualities that Mercury has, but Venus has it. So we got to learn how to be more diplomatic in our relationship in a lot of ways, to not just draw these boundaries that we did in the past 18 months of saying, this is me, that's you, don't violate me, this is my boundary. We're going to start to learn how to go back and forth, and this new moon is the onset of that. And you know what? For those of you who studied the nakshatras, this full moon is in the nakshatra of Chitra. And Chitra is like the beautiful architect of existence. It's what it creates has brilliance. We are now the architects of our lives in terms of how we bring ourselves in relation to others and what kind of dynamics we're able to create. So now let's move to April 7th, where Mercury stations to start its direct motion in the sign of Pisces at 26 degrees. You know what this reminds me of? You know, you're watching movies like someone gets thrown into the ocean, and it's just the way that they were thrown in because like a shipwreck or something, they're just sinking, just going down, and water's going down their throat into their lungs. And then somehow they start to resurface and start to see the lights on the top of the water while they're still beneath. That's the kind of imagery I'm getting with this Mercury station to go direct. And Mercury has been drowning in the sign of Pisces. It's debilitated. And on top of that, it's in a sign where there's the presence of Saturn and there's Rahu North Node conjuncted. It's just been messy in terms of having any kind of a clarity. So it's almost as if the intellect, Mercury represents the intellect, starting to resurface from the depth where it was drowning. And as I told you guys, I have a cold, sinuses are getting stuffed. I'll be right back. 1 second. Okay, let us continue with Mercury station direct. So as I was just giving that analogy of Mercury drowning and then starting to resurface, so we're not talking about having clarity yet. Mercury is still debilitated. Mercury is still going toe to toe with North Node Rahu. But it is about reorientation of Mercury, which is saying something about our intellect and our thinking process. Our power of discernment is starting to reorient itself and hopefully more towards reality. So this mental fog is not going to immediately lift and we're not going to have a sense of clarity right away. But we could say the tides are starting to shift. So there's now greater ability to predict, to decode, to translate, to perceive, and to know what we're perceiving, and have our reality checking become a little bit more intact. Not fully, but we're coming back to it. You know, it's like someone punches you out, you get knocked out, and there's that woozy moment, and then you're coming back to this is that kind of a phase. But we're still kind of woozy because of debilitation and Rahu. You know, we were overtaken by the impressions that we were getting rather than being able to do some reality checking and some fact checking. And Mercury in the sign of Pisces will make us very receptive and impressionable to our environments. So other people's moods, modes, ways of being could really sit on us and penetrate, and then we would get into that kind of mode and mood. And what I was saying, that Libra moon too right now, it's kind of showing us like, okay, the boundaries are drawn here, but I know who I am. I can see who you are. How do we negotiate? With this Mercury and this discernment of it coming back on the same day too, coming back online, it's saying something. We're not going to just absorb other people's energy and think it's our own, or to just constantly dissolve those boundaries and then not understand where we stand and where another person stands. These kinds of things makes the mind very unorganized and being able to make decisions and to be decisive. So this Mercury station direct is like a glimpse of hope of regaining these powers. And you know what? Like Mercury retrograde is rough, but another thing that it does, it makes us maybe reminisce or reflect on our memories a lot, because Pisces is an emotional sign, is a water sign, is about our interiority, and it goes to the depth of it. So we might have been doing a lot of self-reflection and revisions in a lot of ways, like finding a loose piece of paper and it's like, what file does this belong to? So in the sign of Pisces, we could have been doing a lot of self-inventory. And last week too, with all that trine between the sign of Cancer, with that waxing quarter moon, it was being initiated. So this Mercury has also been useful in a lot of ways. I know this kind of self-defense that was coming out of these Aries eclipses relative to the sign of Libra. When we go into that defensive mode of defending the self, a lot of times we lose sight of what matters to the self. And by having this Mercury retrograde in a sign that's very dreamy, it was kind of touching base with what our dreams are, how our intuition works, and things that we need to let go. I mean, again, if you look at the nakshatra system, this Mercury station making its direct, I mean, all the planets, most of them are right now in Uttara Bhādrapadā. And this is a nakshatra of purification and understanding the essence of something. I mean, in Purva Bhādrapadā, it was going to burn everything so that it could get to the essence of something. In Uttara Bhādrapadā, the essence is what matters most. So Mercury being in this nakshatra, going through this transit, all of that self-inventory and that self-reflection that's internal was allowing us to get to the essence of who we are now, where we stand, what remains, what our dreams are, how we want to proceed from here forth. So we'll know how to align our mental processing and our actions when Mercury moves into the sign of Aries. In some sense, on a positive note, we could think about Mercury here was getting inspired, but first I had to kind of drown to figure out why it needs to save itself. So in general, this is still not an action moment for Mercury. Like, what are the application to our thoughts, what we've been dreaming about, what we envision for ourselves? That comes when Mercury moves into the sign of Aries, because our words are going to become sharper, our thoughts are going to become sharper, and they are more directed. It's almost as if the thoughts are getting individuated through our actions. But we're still in the processing phase. This is a process of regrouping right now, if nothing else. It's discerning through like what visions, what dreams are still useful, which ones are not useful, what do I need to get rid of, what do I need to stitch with what, because Mercury brings things into relation with each other. So we don't yet need to make final decisions, but we're starting to understand what stays and what must go. So now this next alignment, depending on where you are, for some people will be on April 7th, for others on April 8th, which involves Venus conjunct Saturn in the sign of Pisces at 25 degrees. And I like to call this refining the ideal. And this is the second time Venus and Saturn are going to meet through this entire Venus retrograde cycle. So it's echoing that first conjunction that Venus had with Saturn, but now it becomes more about a process of refinement rather than the first time where Saturn was putting Venus on some sort of a tight, bounded, we got balloons. Here we go. Some bounded framework and structure where it felt limited. Now it becomes about refining things. And there's something that we need to endure right now in this refinement process. And I feel that's what Saturn's bringing to Venus. For example, Pisces, and we got to remember Venus is exalted in the sign of Pisces. Pisces invites us to dream really big, like beyond what reality can accommodate. It doesn't want to set limits. It wants to dissolve all boundaries and make things merge. It's always thinking about the ideal form rather than what's practical. And we know in real life, the ideal, the idea, and application and practice are not usually the same thing. Like if you've ever been in love, you might have an idea of what the ideal love is, and then you get into the actual relational dynamic with that person and it's grimy. Sometimes it feels dirty. It feels life denying even sometimes. It is so far from that ideal. Like Venus in Pisces wants the ideal of creativity, the ideal of spiritual union, or ideal of aesthetic beauty. Again, the theory and practice are sometimes very far apart from each other. So Saturn's role here is vital. It's almost as if Saturn's encouraging Venus that, look, all of these ideas that you have, they're good. It's worth making them into something tangible. But the way that you're dreaming about them and that you're conceptualizing them, they have no real application in the world. So you need to restrict these ideals. You need to refine these. You need to be rational about it. It's giving Venus the power of critical thinking and even criticizing its own dreams and visions to be able to birth it into something that's tangible in the world, to individuate it in the sign of Aries once when it arrives there. I know Saturn is also helping Venus, is helping us to understand like these longings that you have. The sign of Pisces can very much represent longing for something, longing for God, longing for love. Some people long for having a good family. Let's say Pisces is in your fourth house. And Saturn's showing like, fine, have the longing, but some of them are not realistic. They're not going to come to fruition. They cannot have a real world application. So Saturn's helping Venus, is helping us not to have a romanticized notion about our dreams right now. So it's limiting the way that we want our internal content, the way that they just want to project externally unfiltered. Saturn's putting a block to that. And the sense of realism always helps us in terms of being in a healthy relationship. If you're creative, in terms of creating what you need to create from thought to the real world, it's what happens internally does not always translate externally. So Saturn's bringing that reality checking, some sense of paradigmatic way of creating an application for it. I know this is a significant moment for Venus, and because it's a significant moment for Venus, is saying that the presence of Saturn's is also significant. So we have not been able to see Venus for weeks because Venus disappears once it becomes combust, when the sun's too close to it, and it's about 15 degrees of separation till we can see Venus. So Venus is invisible, but Venus is starting its reemergence with this conjunction with Saturn, where it's going to become the morning star. So it's kind of like harboring a new dawn, a new beginning as the morning star. And if you know the myth of Inanna, Inanna has to go to the underworld where her sister is. And as she enters the underworld, she has to drop one layer of her beauty and aesthetic adornments. And by the time she arrives to the underworld, she's completely bare and naked. And she's actually in a state of dying before she is saved. So this Venus is saying that in this process, even though we are in the sign of Pisces and Venus is exalted, because of Venus's disappearance from the sky, we are like Inanna. We had to give up our power, the way that we are adorned. You know, like wintertime, in summertime, you look at the trees, they're all so lush and beautiful. They got the adornment of flowers and leaves and all of this movement. In wintertime, it's bare and naked. Again, that Uttara Bhādrapadā nakshatra, right? The essence of the tree is pretty much revealed in the wintertime. That's the framework. That's the truth. Everything's rising from that. I mean, when you look at a tree in wintertime, it's like the same roots that are beneath the ground, we're getting a representation of it outside, right? All the adornment in that few months of the year are not what the tree is about. It's a part of it. It's what stems from the root within the ground and the way that those roots have extended themselves outwards as branches. And it's kind of like we got to see ourselves without the adornments, without all the bells and whistles. In a lot of ways, we were humbled, we were disarmed, brought low. And when we are put in those positions in life, we are forced to see the essence of who and what we are. And Saturn is a planet of rationality, and Saturn being with Venus right now that's been stripped off of its power and the ways that it's adorned, is asking it, what is the practical way of rising again? Saturn's asking Venus, be realistic. What's worth loving? What is worth creating? What is worth building? So this is the kind of practicality that Saturn's bringing to Venus, to us, to our senses and how we want to be. Another thing to remember about Venus represents the five senses. And under Saturn's gaze, Venus is forced to recalibrate how it senses things and processes things. It numbs it a little bit, it dulls it, or it makes it heavy. So in a way, we can translate that as to our dreams and our visions being weighed against their practical capacity and what kind of applications they need again. And, you know, we can see this as punishment because Saturn always brings hardship, no matter how you flip the coin. But we can see that every kind of refinement also requires hardship because it's telling us something about our limits. It's a no to us, what we cannot do. And it's usually through this process that we actually start to understand what we value, what is of value, where and how much we should invest our energy. Saturn is about stinginess. It wants to hold back. So we're learning that maybe you shouldn't invest yourself the way that you want to. Be practical. Maybe a little less is actually more. In very practical terms, the way to interpret this conjunction, we can see it as a reality check for relationships because Venus represents relationships and marriage, our creative paths, how we want to create, how we can create. Maybe there are some limits. We're going to realize what that is. Or it might be pertaining to, let's say, our financial matters. Somehow the ideal of mind and the practical application, that gap is being shown to us by Saturn. So Saturn's not trying to kill the dream of Venus right now, but how to structure it, how to frame it, how to do the actual work for it. And the beauty of Saturn conjunct Venus, it makes something that, let's say, you create, makes it something lasting with longevity. So whatever hardship that Saturn's bringing to the forefront and in our viewpoint right now is that if you do this refinement, if you can do it, there's longevity in it. Saturn's also asking us, show me your commitment, which is referring to the kind of work that we have to do. Stop telling me what you dream about, what you want to do, what you're going to do. I don't want to hear it. Tell me the application, the real life application of it. So in a lot of ways, Saturn's maturing us up in this process of love, loving, our vision, our imagination, our dreams, our creativity, all the things that Venus symbolizes. So it's moving us from inspiration to the actual building process of something. Again, I'm going to take a little short break. I'll be back. All right, so same day, we have a sextile between Venus and Uranus in the sign of Taurus, still at 25 degrees. So Saturn was telling Venus how to distill ideas into something lasting. The sextile with Uranus is an invitation to adaptation, to the new changes that are going to be made. It's like a creative reconfiguration of something. So Uranus, this conjunction is saying something about us having a realization about old patterns we got to break, aesthetic comforts that we have, something that now aligns to the present. The sign of Taurus is practical. Uranus wants to change in the sign of Taurus. Saturn's putting Venus on some kind of a chokehold of, hey, you have to be practical. So these decisions, we can see the changes on the horizon to make some changes to refine things, but they still have to have that practical manner about them. And Venus is exalted as the ruler of the sign of Taurus. So whatever it is that Uranus is trying to do, Venus is supporting it, albeit with some limits because of Saturn's presence. And we could also see this, that Uranus is transmitting a kind of a message to Venus too, in terms of like those habitual changes and things that need to change, which comes to be part of that refinement project or process we're going through. And this could just be letting go of outdated forms of relating, or the ways that we did our creating, or the ways that we used to value things. Uranus is bringing something experimental in the middle of this, while Venus is still has to be practical in a lot of ways. It's talking about a modification process. So we can see like Uranus-Venus conjunction can create to bring about some kind of a novelty, even a shock factor. But to me, it seems like this sextile that they're making is more about discovering new expressions of love, beauty, connection, and even self-worth. Something that reflects who we are now, where we are in our lives, and how we want to proceed from here forth. All right, so I'm going to wrap it up here because the sinuses are just like pushing up to my brain at this moment. I'll come back to cover Mercury conjunct Rahu in the sign of Pisces on the 10th and the couple of other transits of the week. And then next week, we'll get into April 2025, week 3. I hope you have a beautiful week ahead. That's it for now. Much love. Till next time.